You know what intimidates a lot of knitters? Socks. Yet, one of the things that I love to knit the most are socks because they're quick, they're small, and once you understand how to make them, you're never gonna want to stop. They are so comfortable and they make amazing gifts as well. Today we're gonna learn how to knit socks from top to bottom, just like this one with a heel flap and gusset. I'll show you every step one by one. All you need are your needles and your yarn. And while you're going to get that material, I want to talk to you about today's sponsor because I've been playing June's Journey. It is a free game that you can download on your phone. It is a game about murder mystery set in the 1920s, which really relates to me because if you didn't know, before being a full-time knitter, I was a full-time swing dancer with my husband. And so the graphics are super pretty. It's a hidden object game where you get to find a bunch of different things, including at some point a crocheted blanket. I was super happy to see some knitting and crocheting things since it's set in the 1920s, obviously. Maybe we'll even get to see a sock knitting machine at some point. That would be fun. I really like playing June's Journey in the morning with my coffee. It's something that I like to do before I start working or even knitting. It kept me surprisingly engaged. It gets tougher and tougher as you go. You can download June's Journey for free by clicking on the link in the description box. Come back here when you find the crocheted blanket to let me know. That being said, let's get to knitting. Let's start our socks. We're gonna need needles, finishing needle. You're not gonna need it right now, but eventually, obviously scissors and yarn. Today I will be knitting with Entre Sœur Hélène, which is based in Quebec, and the color is called Sex on the Beach. It is a merino nylon, and I have 130 grams because I have 2 times 50 grams here, which creates this beautiful fade, and a 30-gram ball that I decided not to use for this pair because 100 grams is way too much for my pairs anyway. I also will be using a long circular needle to work in magic loop. It is my preferred way to teach socks just because I feel like if you know how to do it in magic loop, then you can do it with the other methods. The other methods are either some double pointed needles. I like to use 4, but a lot of people use 5 of them. And so if you use 5 of them, basically 2 needles count as half of your stitches and 2 other needles count as the other half of your stitches, making it easy to transpose from one to the other. You could be using mini circulars. Obviously these aren't the correct size, they're way too big, but you could be using minis. You would need a 9-inch mini circular. And in order to do the sock that I'm going to be doing today on the mini circular, you're still going to need another type of needle to finish the sock. Or you could be using 3 flexi flip needles, which are kind of like these double pointed needles. They're a little bit longer and you only have 3 in a set because 2 of them will create the, can I place it? 2 of them will create the circle, and the third one is the one you're going to use to knit. I really love using these as well. Maybe if you want a video showing how I use them, I can do that at another time. So we're going to be using a long circular. These are Chiaogus, which are my favorite for sock knitting. They're just pointy enough for me, and it is in 2.25 millimeter. They are a probably 100 centimeter or 80 centimeter needle. I would say don't go below 80 centimeter cable length because you're gonna have more trouble doing your magic loop. I'm gonna start with, usually I start with the middle of the ball pretty much all the time, but I wound this one like this and I really want to start with the beautiful turquoise for the top of my socks. So I'll start with the outside of the ball, which is not usual for me. I will start with a long tail cast on, and in order to calculate how much yarn I'm going to need for a long tail cast on, I'm going to simply take this yarn, hold it up to my nose, and extend my arm away from me for the measurement. And this amount
usually will be plenty for a long tail cast on. So I will place it like this and in my hand, start my long tail cast on. I never have issues with the stretchiness of my long tail cast on because I will start like this. I put my needle here. I don't like making slip knots, so this is my first stitch by putting it on top and turning it towards me and back up. Now zoom in. You'll go towards yourself, go inside the stitch, and go get the yarn that's in the back, pass it through, and let go of the thumb. And this is where you can make your long tail cast on more stretchy, is by making sure that you leave space in between your stitches. So the next time I'll put my finger here, I go towards myself, I point towards myself and go in the stitch as if I was going to knit it. Imagine my thumb is a needle. This is how I enter the stitch. And then I go scoop the yarn from my pinky and my pinky, I meant my index, and I let go, and my finger here will measure a space in between my stitches. So again, like this and through, and keep it loose between your stitches. Through, take the next one here and keep a space. And this is what's going to allow your cast on to stretch enough to go over your foot, because if you go too scrunched in between here, even if your stitches can glide easily, if you're too close together like this, there is no space here in the stitch to actually stretch much, whereas here I have a lot more space to stretch my stitches in the base. I'm going to undo those last 3 stitches and do it again. I can get quite fast, but I don't tighten it up too much on the needle. My tension and my speed is now so ingrained in my body that I don't even have to think about leaving space. I just know how much to pull or push. And if your thread here is unraveling, just let it go. It's going to take the twist back up, and then you can pick it up again and keep going. I'm casting on 56 stitches, but you have to go and do your own calculation for your own foot. I made a video about the 3 most important things for perfectly fitted socks, and I explained how to calculate how many stitches you should be casting on. If you don't want to spend time doing calculation, it's all well and fine and good. Just take a number that seems right to you. Generally, for smaller, very small feet, like a woman's 5 or something like that, 56 is great. Then there's 60. I think most people cast on 64. And then for bigger feet, like oftentimes men's feet, yeah. Sorry, my English. It's more like a 68, 72, even sometimes 76. I cast on 72 for my husband, who wears 10.5s, but it really depends. If you're just choosing a random number like that, it might not fit. You're going to be knitting a certain amount, and then you're going to try it on and see if it's the right number for you. Let me count. 2, 4, 6. Once you have your number of stitches on your needle, you're going to slide everything to the cable. You're going to go to the middle. 2, 4, 8, 10, 12, 14, 16, 18, 20, 22, 24, 26, 28. Much easier for me to count in French. I know how to count in English, but... Alright, and you're going to split in the middle like this with your cable to join for magic loop. And my favorite way to make sure that my magic loop is going to be well placed is I like to make sure that all my stitches kind of kiss each other. So my row of stitches here is facing one another like this all along. So there's no stitch that is twisting away from the inside. It's all facing the inside, so this would be wrong. So I want to place it back to the right place here and make sure that all my stitches face each other on the inside of the cable and the needle. And I'm gonna make sure that my needles point to the right. Look again. Always look more than once, more than twice to make sure that everything's facing the right way. Once everything's facing the right way, all my stitches are actually pointing downwards when I hold like this. And my yarn is also pointing downwards. Both of them are down here. I'm gonna put the front half of my stitches onto my needle, and the second half I'm gonna hold them in my left hand and pull to create, let's see, the magic loop. So I pull just enough to have a big loop on one side, enough to have the big loop on the other, and we start. So if you've never done magic loop, that's, you know, the setup. If you've done magic loop before, maybe you are ready to just start knitting and you didn't have to watch all this, but I like to give all the information to make sure we all can start together. So this yarn here is gonna come from over my cable. I don't want to take it from under. I'll do it again. Floop. So if I start knitting with the cable running down here and starting to knit, what's gonna happen is this yarn is gonna like come through the loop, and I don't really like it. So I like to bring my needle under this yarn so I can start knitting here. So whether I'm an English style knitter or continental style knitter, it doesn't matter. What I want to make sure I do is that I take the correct strand. This one is not the right one. Take the right strand, the one that's attached to the ball. And then when I start doing my magic loop, what I want to do is hold the back, this cable here, hold it very close to the beginning so I can start knitting. For socks, I usually like making ribbing, whether it's 1-1 ribbing or 2-2 ribbing, does not matter. It's a preference, it's a stylistic choice. Let's do 2-2 today. I just had a moment of, just made a quick decision. I'm going to do 2-2 ribbing, so 2 knits and 2 purls. It's really important that on this first row, we keep checking and making sure we do the correct pattern. I always do that. I always kind of start talking or I'll start watching something and then get to the end of the row and I have an extra knit stitch or too few purl stitches, and then I realize that I messed up. So I get to the end of this needle, and then I like to turn my needles first and then slide my stitches onto the needle. And then same thing as before, everything's pointing downwards. I hold everything and I pull on the back needle and I start knitting by holding the back of the cable in the back, I should say, holding it really close to the needle. That's what's going to prevent ladders. I don't have to pull tighter, anything like that, if I just make sure that my cable is long enough to create 2 beautiful loops that won't force my stitches away from each other. And if I pull that cable close to the needle when I start every half rows. So every time I change needle. We're going to be doing this ribbing for as long as we want. Really, it's a matter of preference. I like a good amount of rib on my cuffs, so I always do probably at least 15 rows of ribbing. but you could do more, you could do less. It is really your preference. Just don't forget that because stocks stretch, it might look like a good amount of ribbing, but then when you pull on it, it's gonna shrink. So try it on before you decide that you're done. That's also why I like using long needles and magic loop, is because I like the ability to try on anytime without having to deal with dropped stitches or having to shuffle my stitches onto a stitch holder or waste yarn or anything like that. So keep knitting your tutu rib until you have, I would say, at least 10 rows and possibly a lot more. Let's do one more turn. We let go of the needle, we turn, I pull the cable and push the needle onto the stitches. I pull here, go inside the stitch, and then take the yarn by taking it from the back here. It's coming in between, from between my cable and my needle. I hold everything really nicely together and I start knitting English style. Why not? Put lifelines at every stage. So you like your cuff, put a lifeline. You like your leg, put a lifeline. You start knitting this and the heel turn, put a lifeline in the heel turn, then pick up and start knitting around, and then put a lifeline after the decreases. All these things make it so if you have to undo a step, you'll only have to undo to the previous step and not the entire thing. My cuff is done. This is 20 rows of 2x2 ribbing, and I'm gonna simply switch to stockinette stitch. There's no need to change the number of stitches, to change your needles, to nothing like that. Just start knitting stockinette stitch until you're ready to start your heel. One thing that some people will do sometimes is use smaller needles for the cuff and then bigger needles for the stockinette. I don't personally feel like it's necessary for me. Some people will use the same needles and then put a few extra stitches after the cuff, but again, I don't feel like it's necessary for me. I love to say that the first thing you should do is just a good old regular no fuss sock before you then look at how it fits and choose which customization you want to make. So you then know if your sock fits better at the leg, at the foot, if the heel is too deep, not deep enough, things like that. Once you've made a pair, you can go into the nitty-gritty of things you want to change. But ultimately, if you start making a sock and right away worry too much about making it customized and like really going all out for all the measurements, I feel like it can be discouraging. So just going with the plain sock, and then if you finish it and it doesn't fit you the way you'd like, you will absolutely find someone that will want to wear it and that will love it for what it is. I've never had a pair of socks that didn't meet a match, a person that wanted to wear it. So here we go. We just keep knitting at our pace for as long as you want. For a heel flap in Gusset, what's going to happen is the heel flap is going to start about just above your ankle bone, the this part of the ankle, you know, the little, you know, if this was a foot, this part here, that little, I don't know what that's called. If you're someone that knows about the human body more than me, please tell me what this ankle bone is called. So you're gonna knit, when you try on your sock, you're gonna pull your sock up to above that section, and when you reach the height of the sock that you like, then you can start making the heel flap. If you're working on a mini circular, you're not going to be able to put on the sock because obviously it's going to have to stretch over your heel, which is going to make you lose some stitches. So when you're ready to try it on, maybe put half of the stitches on another circular needle or waste yarn and try it on. It's really important, in my opinion, to try it on just to make sure that we're on the right track. Usually if I was a beginner knitter or if I was trying a different needle or yarn, I would try it on after the cuff and maybe a little bit of the stockinette just to make sure that it holds on to my foot properly. It's worth the time to stop knitting, try it on before you keep going. This is not much work to undo, but a whole sock that doesn't fit is frustrating because you have one, then you have to make the other or unknit the one that you just made because you don't like how it fits. So keep going like that and I'll see you when I'm ready to make the heel flap. The length I want for my leg. Now we're ready to start the heel flap. The heel flap in Gusset heel has basically 3 steps: the heel flap, the heel turn, and then the gusset decreases. All of these steps will be done on only half of your stitches, which is why a magic loop or DPNs are great because we've already separated our stitches in the right place. So I'm going to be doing my heel only on my first half. So this is where I started my round. So on my first half, I'm going to be working the heel. It can be the first half, it can be the second half. It does not matter, but I generally always do it on the first half. So starting now, I'm going to go back and forth. So these stitches in the back here are just going to be held there for a little while. I'm going to do a classic slip stitch motif for the heel flap. You don't have to do this, but it is usually what we see the most for heel flaps. It reinforces the heel flap, which is not absolutely necessary, but I think it looks cute. So what we're going to do is basically slip 1 stitch purlwise with the yarn still in the back, and then knit the next. We're going to do that all the way to the end of this needle. So slip 1 purlwise, knit 1. Oops. Slip 1 purlwise, knit 1. Slip 1 purlwise, knit 1. And we keep going. Slip 1 purlwise, knit 1 till the end. So that's going to be our row 1. And the row 2 is when we turn our work around and we work back because we're going back and forth. So slip, knit, slip, knit, slip, knit. You should end with a knit because you should have even number. That's why I like to work my stitches by counts of 4, because when you divide something that's divided by 4, it's still even number. So this is an even number. I'm done with a knit stitch. I'm going to turn it, and then I'm going to go slip 1 purlwise, but my yarn is in the front this time because that's just where my purl row is. Front for my purl row, back for my knit row. So slip the first stitch and then just purl all the way to the end of the row. We're going to repeat those 2 rows as many times as we have stitches on that one needle, meaning right now I have 56 stitches on my entire sock, which means I have 28 stitches on this needle, the half of my sock. So I want 28 rows, which means 14 back and forth. So either way you prefer counting it, it is 28 rows or 14 back and forths. It can be helpful at this moment to put a little stitch marker in the first row that you just did. Where did I put a stitch marker? I just found those little stitch markers that someone gifted me. They're so adorable. So I'm going to use this little clasp one. in order to mark where my first row is, so it's going to make it easier to count. I'll show you different ways to count, but this first slip stitch here, the one that we slipped back here, I'm going to put that stitch marker here to tell me that's the first row where I slipped. Yeah, I don't always do that. Generally, I can recognize it without having to put a stitch marker, but that is a way that you can easily count. We slip the first stitch, then knit the next one. Slip, knit, slip, knit. And as you go, you'll notice that your slip stitch, not rows, but columns, are going to be giving you bigger V's because you slip them every other row. Those V's are extended. So it's easy to recognize whether you're on a slipping stitch or a knitting stitch after a few back and forth. I can already see that this is a slip row and this is a knit row and this is a slip row. Not row, sorry, column. Slip column, knit column. And I'm gonna also use that later to count my rows. My yarn is forward. I slip one and then I start purling here all the stitches. So that's my second back and forth that's going to be done after this one. You can also write it down if you prefer. I'll come back after I've done my 14 and show you what it looks like. Okay, we're back with a heel flap that's almost completely done. Here's how it looks. You can clearly see that we have columns of slip stitches that are bigger, and in between we have columns of regular stitches that are much smaller. There's a few ways to count. Like I said, you can count with this marker here. So if I have this marker here, what I like to do is, this is my row number 1 is the first that I slipped. So I go 1, 2, I count the number of V's. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, and this is my 14th slip stitch. So I have to do the return pass and then I'm good. 14, that was my aim. The other way is to count the slip stitches by counting the big stitches in a column. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, and the 14th is on my needle. So I just have to come back, I'm done. The last way, which is kind of a fun way, is to look at the back. In the back, it creates this kind of a little bit of a checkerboard type effect. And all those long strands here are the slip stitches. So what I like to do is I locate one column. I will locate the first long strand, which is this one here, and I'll just run my needle in one column like this so I can count those strands easily without getting lost. So by doing this, and the last one is up here like this, I can go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14. 14 rows one way, and then it means that in between there's a row, so I'm at 27 rows because I haven't come back. The reason I haven't come back yet is because this return pass is the moment where we're going to set up 2 markers. Those markers are going to be super important for the next 2 rows, and then we don't need them anymore. And those 2 markers are really the thing that oftentimes confuses people for the heel turn. When we do a heel turn, we're going to be working short rows. So we're going to be working those stitches to a certain point, and then come back to another point here, and then start getting them longer and longer in order to then reach the end. How do we know where to turn? Generally, the pattern is going to tell you. It's going to tell you knit, I don't know, 16 stitches, then do a slip, slip, knit, knit 1, turn, then knit 5 stitches, knit 2 together. And then, but those numbers are so difficult to remember because they have no reasoning behind them. I'm going to give you the reasoning right now. you need to separate your heel flap in thirds. If you have 30 stitches on your needle here, it's very simple. 10, 10, 10. That's the goal. I have 56 stitches total, which means 28 on this needle. 28 doesn't divide by 3. So what I prefer doing is having more stitches on the outside, the two outside thirds, and then a bit less stitches in the middle. It could be the opposite. Personally, I find that having more stitches on the outside and less in the middle, as opposed to less on the outside and more in the middle, fits my heel better. The more stitches you leave in the center, the less deep your heel is going to be and the less pointy it's going to be as well. The least amount of stitches you leave in the middle, the more pointy and deep that heel turn is going to get. So for me, for 28 stitches, I will knit 10 stitches. Not knit, but I'm going to slip the first one, obviously, as usual. Then knit purl 9, so I can get 10 stitches total. So 1, 2, 3. I have 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Then I'm going to put a stitch marker to divide my thirds. And look at those. This is my logo with a little sock on it. How adorable! And then I'm going to purl 8. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8. Put another marker, and then I should have 10 left in order to have 28. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and 10. Perfect. At this point here, I've split for my heel turn. Just so you know, if I forgot to put my little markers here, what I like to do is slip everything to the cable and then put some removable stitch markers in those places. It's absolutely doable. And also, if I were to count at the end of a return row, there is one extra stitch here because I knit that end stitch. So if I were to count the stitches on the side, I would have 14, not counting the one on the stitch. Same thing here. I have 14 big stitches. I'm not counting the one on the needle. I meant on the needle here. So we're ready for a heel turn. Now that this is there here, the heel turn you'll see is going to be much simpler. What we're going to do is slip the first stitch, like always. Slip the first stitch as if to purl. Knit 2, 3 stitches before the second marker. So we want to skip the first marker. We want to keep going because then we're going to go back and forth and make the rows longer. So we have to go 3 stitches before the second marker. Knit to the first marker, slip it, keep knitting until you have 3 stitches before. 1, 2, 3. So I have to knit 1 more. Perfect. We're on the right side row. On the right side row, we're going to do a slip, slip, knit. I like to slip my first one knitwise, my second one purlwise. If you slip both knitwise, it's all right. That's just how I like to do it. Knit them together and then knit the other one to reach the marker. Now your marker has done its job. You can remove it. We're going to turn our work. Now we're going to slip that first stitch with the yarn in front because we're on a purl row. We're going to purl to 3 stitches before the marker. So it's going to be fewer stitches if you have smaller socks. It's going to be more stitches if you have bigger socks. We're here. We've got 3 stitches. We're going to purl 2 together. So on the wrong side row, we purl 2 together and then purl that extra stitch and remove the marker because it's done its job. Thank you very much. Turn it around, and I'm gonna do the rest, the other rows in continental. So I have this, and now I have a big hole here, which is normal, and I'll have a big hole here. So the goal is to close the holes. So I'm gonna be slipping the first stitch, knit to 1 stitch before the gap. 1 stitch before the gap, which is very obvious. And then I'm gonna slip, slip, knit them together to close that gap. I like to give a little tug here on the back leg of the second stitch. I think it makes the slip knit looks even neater. Then I knit one and I turn. Slip the first one, purlwise, purl to 1 stitch before the gap. The gap is here. I purl 2 together to close the gap, and then I purl an extra 1 and I turn. Again, slip, knit to 1 stitch before the gap, I slip, slip, and knit. I like to pull a bit and then knit 1. And as you can tell, I'm eating up all those little stitches as I go. And 1 more going backwards or purling to 1 before the gap. Oops. Right here, purl 2 together, purl 1 and turn. Every time you're done with a purl row, you should have the same number of stitches on both sides. So I have 2, 4, 6 and 2, 4, 6. And then in the middle here, I'm starting to see my little shaping. It's really magical. I really love a heel turn. I think it looks so good. So I'm going to keep going until I have no more stitches here. If you have a odd number of stitches when you start on the outside sections, I started with 10 here and 10 here. If I had 9 here and 9 here, it's possible that I'm ending on a slip slip knit and a knit purl 2 together without having 1 extra stitch to knit, and it's perfectly fine. In that case, you do that last slip slip knit. You don't have 1 to knit, you turn around, you slip, and you keep going. That's really not a problem at all. But if you have an even number of stitches on either side, then you will always end with the same thing, which is knit 2 together, whichever way you're doing it, and then purl or knit an extra stitch. Here we go. This is my last knit row for my heel turn. Turn the work, and on that very last purl row, I like to not slip the first stitch, but actually purl that first stitch. If you don't remember to do it, or if you if you slip that stitch, it's not the end of the world. It's just a matter of creating a more tidy join when we're gonna start knitting in the round again. But really, it doesn't matter so much. So here, oops, split the yarn. And we're done with the heel turn. We get this very funky looking little shape here that looks like this. And now it's the moment people generally dread, which is picking up stitches on the side of the sock. Don't worry about it. You'll see it's much simpler than you think. I can, first of all, take this little thing out. Okay. I'll start by knitting across the heel flap stitches. And then I'm going to pick up the stitches along the first side of my heel flap. When I do that, I like to keep all my heel stitches, including my gusset stitches here, all on the same side of the needle. So then I know exactly that I have to work decreases only on that side and not on this side. And what I'm going to do to help me make sure that I pick up the same amount of stitches on both sides is put, again, a stitch marker that I can remove later, possibly, that I can remove later. So I'll put a stitch marker here just to tell me, hey, that's where you started picking up stitches. And I'm going to turn the sock so the heel flap faces downwards and the heel flap is lined up like this. That's where I'm going to be picking up stitches. Okay, so when I'm here, the stitch below here is the one that was on our needle that we just knitted. And the stitch just below, that's kind of two colors here, is the last purl row. We knitted that one too. So the first slip stitch is right here. If you start here, it's fine. Don't worry about it. You might just have one extra stitch and it's fine. Don't worry about having an extra stitch or one less. It's not a big deal. But I'm going to start right in that first slip stitch here and pull through. And go up one more. And go here and pull through. And I'm uncurling with my fingers to find the two legs of that upside down V here. Here. Whoop. And then if you're an English knitter, I'll just knit that stitch. Again, I'm following along the same row here. What's tempting is to go here, but as you can tell, if I go here, I have 3 strands, or if I go like this and I go in, there's still 1 strand left here alone. That's not the one we want. And if I knit into that here, I'm no longer following the same line here. So take it off if you notice that you've gone too far in. Just keep picking up. So now, because I put a little stitch marker on my needle here, I can say, oh, I picked up 2, 4, 6. Perfect. I'll keep going. Ideally, I'll be able to pick up 14 because we did 14 back and forth. And that's the time you want to be, precise. Take your time. This, like this. Once you've done it a few times, it's not going to be scary anymore. This. And then I have one more here that is not connected to the other side of the knitting. If I check here, this strand, that's the last strand that's connected to the other side, connects to this stitches right here. This stitch, I'm sorry. It's a singular stitch. So this would be the last stitch. Let's count. 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14. Yes. And now I'm going to want to start using this part of my sock again. So I'm going to want to connect all of this. But there is the dreaded hole here that a lot of people really dislike and they don't want to get a hole here. So what I like to do for that hole, I'll pick up one side of this stitch here that's actually connected to the other side of the knitting right here. And I'll also pick up the bar that's like in between the stitches, and with the help of my other needle, I will knit those two together into an extra stitch. It doesn't have to be very precise. You can play with it and figure out what is best for you. But for me, if I do this, it just creates this extra stitch here that'll help get all of this together. So now, it's time to knit the top of my sock again. So I'll put those stitches back on my needle, and I'll put all those stitches on the cable and start knitting. And we're still not completely connected here. It's normal. Everything's fine. So knit all of those. And yes, if you have a color changing yarn like me, the heel flap and heel turn will create a difference in the front. Like you'll see the color change here a little bit more drastically because all of the, you know, blending happened there, but it's okay. I don't mind. I have little tricks for that eventually if you want some. So once I get to the end of this needle, I'm done with the instep. So I'm gonna turn and keep doing my magic loop. In order to do so right now, I have to pick up all along here, but I'm gonna put all of the instep stitches onto my cable. And these are gonna also remain on my cable while I use the needle to pick up. Again, here I have a little gap that I wanna kind of minimize. So I'm gonna take that stretch of yarn here that's attached to nothing, and I'm also gonna go get the first stitch right underneath the one that I'm gonna be starting to pick up on, and I'm gonna use this to knit both through the back loop in order to close that gap a little bit. So that's one stitch, and then I have to pick up 14. So I'm gonna go in to pick up the V's. The V's are going the other way now. That's normal, because now we're going down the heel flap. Earlier we were kind of going up the heel flap. So I want to find the hole that we have 2 bars of a V and pick that up. 2 bars of a V and pick up. 2 bars of a V and pick up. English style. Two bars of a V here, pick up until the end. Oops. I like to pull a bit on my fabric when I'm doing it English style. I'll pull on my fabric to kind of make the space to pull through. You could also use your other needle and actually knit that stitch. So put the other needle through like this and knit that stitch. But I find that it's more manipulation than needed for me. Like that. And we're almost there. Here, I think that's my last slip stitch. Let's count. Because I took an extra stitch at the top, I should have 15. 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14, 15. Perfect. Now I'm ready to connect everything. So right now it looks like this. I have this kind of weird, uneven magic loop. Technically, the middle of my row is now like kind of here. But I don't like having a lot of markers in my knitting. It kind of stops my flow. But if you want to, you can consider this marker to kind of be the beginning of your round. So some patterns will tell you to put beginning of the round marker at the middle of those bottom stitches. It's fine, it works. It's going to create exactly the same thing. What it's telling you to do is basically every time you pass that marker, you're starting a new round, which means that when I get to the end of this needle here, I'm going to decrease here. Okay, new round. I'm going to decrease 3 stitches from the end of this needle. These are the gusset decrease rounds. My goal is going to be to get to a point where I have the same number of stitches that I had originally on that needle, which for me was 28. So I'm going to get all the way to 3 stitches before the end here. I'm going to knit 2 together to do a decrease. Knit 1. The second half of my stitches here, I already have 28 stitches on this needle, so I'm only going to knit through all the time. So row 1 is decreases on the heel part only, and not on the instep at all. And row 2 is going to be knit all the way through. So when I get to the end of this needle, I decreased on one side of the heel right here. So I'm going to have to decrease on that side of the heel as well. So turn around. I'm going to have a lot of stitches here, so it might be more difficult to push all the stitches onto my needle, but it's fine, it works. And pull, and I'm going to do a decrease here. My decrease on this side is going to be a slip, slip, knit. So I'm going to do 1 stitch, knit 1 stitch, slip, slip, knit the 2 together here. And I have a little hole here, and sincerely, it doesn't really bother me. Some people don't like to have that little hole, so you could find a way to like close it down a little bit more, but personally I just let it be. Doesn't matter at all. And I'm going to keep knitting. So I did a decrease on one side, a decrease on the other, which means that on my next row, no decrease. So here at the end of this needle, I don't decrease because I've already decreased the round before. So when I pass this marker, it's a reminder that, oh, we're on a different row. I don't have to decrease now. Here and here. Knit through the instep. And on the second here. And on this needle, which is the heel needle, I don't decrease because I just did the row before. And I just repeat those 2 rows. So once I pass my marker, I'm on a decrease row. And I'll show you what it looks like to be on a decrease row versus on a non-decrease. I'm saying row, but it's rounds, because that's what's going to help you remember. And if you're not sure, it happens to me all the time. Am I on a decrease round or am I not on a decrease round? I'll show you what it looks like both ways, so you don't have to use your memory, but you can use your eyes to tell you. So right now I'm on a decrease row. I knit 2 together on the first side and knit. I just did a decrease, okay, which means that on the next row I'm going to have to knit and not decrease. When I just did a decrease, it looks like I have 2 stitches stacked on top of one another right underneath my needle. So this is the row here underneath my needle. This one, this stitch, this one here, but hoops, there's this little extra leg here. So here, there's 2 stitches under 1. I just did a decrease. So when I get to there, if I see that, it means just knit. On the other side, I haven't done the decrease yet, so you'll see the difference. Right under my needle is here a single stitch. But under that single stitch is where I have this extra little leg. So this was the decrease. And then I knit an extra row So when I get there, I have to do the slip, slip, knit. I have to knit these two together. So that's how you can tell if you're on a decrease row or not on a decrease row. But once again, I'm all for not stressing out. So if you messed up and you decreased on one row and you weren't supposed to, don't worry about it. Just, you can do 2 rows without a decrease to compensate for the fact that you did a decrease 2 rounds in a row. It really doesn't matter. Your socks don't have to be perfect. The first pair anyway, you're gonna learn a ton. Just be gentle on yourself. Keep decreasing until you reach the same number of stitches that you have on the instep down here on that section. It's going to give you something like that, a nice little gusset decrease that looks similar on both sides. I went ahead and knit the rest of the decreases off camera. And I also knit the entire foot because the foot is just like the leg. We're just knitting round and round and round. Did not take time to do my manicure because I was just so in a rush to finish this sock for you guys. Anyway, we're now at the point where I'm ready to do my toe decreases. And how do I know that? Because I keep trying on my sock. So I try on my sock, and when my sock is almost covering my little toe, my pinky toe, I know that I'm ready to do the toe decreases. You could also count the number of rows you're gonna do as a decrease, like as the toe box. For me, I start with 28 stitches per side, and I decrease until I get 10 stitches per side, which means that I'm decreasing 18 stitches per side, and those 18 correspond to 18 rows because I'm decreasing 2 stitches every 2 rows. So I do a row of decrease, a row no decrease, a row of decrease, a row no decrease, which means that technically I'm doing 1 decrease per row. Does it make sense? I have to decrease 18, so I have 18 rows. And so what I could go do is measure how many centimeters or inches 18 rows is, and then I will subtract that to the length I want. So if I have a foot that's a certain length, I'm gonna want to knit the sock personally to 5% less than the length of my foot, and then I'll calculate, how long I need to make the foot in order to make the toe box. If you're knitting for yourself, just try it on. Try it on, start knitting the toe box, and I would recommend that if it's the first time, you put a lifeline around this part of the sock at this point. So when you knit that toe box, if it's too short or too long, you can unravel and start again from that point. So now, toes. The toes are going to be very similar to the decreases we did at the gusset, except that we're going to do it on both needles. I'm starting here. You can tell, I had a marker here. I took it off when I started knitting off camera because I don't like having a marker that I have to slip every single round. But it doesn't matter whether I start my decreases on the bottom of the foot or the top of the foot. It's all gonna look the same. Really, it does not matter whatsoever. I'm ready to start. I'm on the top of the foot. That's perfect for me. I just have to remember where I started to make sure that I'm following my rows properly, my rounds. So I'm gonna knit one. I'm gonna do a slip, slip, knit. And then I'm gonna knit 2-3 stitches before the end, and then when I get to 3 stitches before the end, I'm gonna do a knit 2 together and knit 1. And what I'm gonna do is the same thing on the other, I went past. I'm gonna do the same thing on the other needle, and that makes my decrease round. So here, I'll do it English style. Whoop. After I've done the decrease round, so knit, slip, slip, knit. Here. Knit to 3, knit to together, knit 1. Once I've done with the decrease round, I'm going to do a plain knit round and then the decrease round again until I hit my number, my target number. Generally, you can get a sense of how wide or how narrow you want the end of your toe box to be by trying. You can try to go down to 10, see if you like it. The next time, if you feel like that was too narrow, you can go down to 12. When I'm saying 10 and 12, I mean per needle. So total of 20 or 24. Or if it's for a child, maybe you go down to 8 per needle, which is 16 total. Personally, for smaller feet, definitely 20 stitches is a good aim, and for larger feet 24 is good. So now I'm going to do a plain round, and I'll keep going like that until I have to do the dreaded grafting. I'm going to give you my little tips and tricks on how to remember correctly the grafting steps, and hopefully you won't be scared of it anymore. See you soon. All right, my toe is done. My sock is done. The only thing left is the grafting. So I cut a piece of the yarn enough so I can weave in the end. And basically, in order to do the grafting, it's like you're doing a row of knitting. So you only need like 3 times the length or the width of your sock. But I always, almost double that. So I'm sure I have enough yarn to weave in at the end. So I'm going to take my darning needle, and this is what I'm going to do. So first off, I finished my toe with a decrease row. I didn't do one extra knit row because I like the look of having the decrease at the end. I find that if I do an extra knit row, sometimes it looks a little squarish. So I finished right there, and I'm going to start my grafting. My grafting for socks is particular in the sense that I don't do a prep step. Usually there's like a preparation step in order to start the grafting on pieces of knitting that are like 2 flat pieces grafted together. Because I'm closing a toe and I want the corner to not be sticking out, I'm going to start right away with the 4 steps of my grafting. First step of my grafting, go in as if to knit in the front and drop it off the needle. Then go in as if to purl on the other stitch here, and then pull through. So that's 1, 2. Now, in the back, go in as if to purl, drop it off, going in as if to knit, pull through. And for a toe, I don't care if it's tighter than the knitting itself, because it's the end of the toe. Tighter is not a bad thing. What I don't want is the loose grafting. And it doesn't matter to me if the tension is not exactly the same as the rest of the knitting. So again, the 2 steps, the steps in the front are go in as if to knit, drop it off, go in as if to purl, keep it on. In the back, go in as if to purl, drop it, go in as if to knit, keep it on. And the way I remember which is which is if I'm looking at knit stitches, I start with knit off, and then it's the other one. And if I'm looking at, there we go. And if I'm looking at purl stitches here, on the inside, I'm looking at purl stitches. I go in as if to purl, drop it, and then as if to knit. And then I pull enough so I get a nice little tidy row of knitting up here. So knit off purl, purl off knit. when I only have 2 stitches on each needle, I round it off by doing knit off, purl off, and purl off, knit off. Now I can look at my knitting, and then I seem to have this little corner here that always happens. It's normal. So what I do is I put my hand into my knitting, and then I'll go through the sock kind of at the base of where this thing is here. So I'll find like kind of, this is my extra stitch, and I'll just go above it here and bring it to the back and pull, boink, and it kind of pulls that little corner in. Now there's no more unsightly corner, and as you wear it, it's also gonna round the point out. And now the only things you have left to do is weave in the end. So I turn my sock upside down, inside out I mean, and I weave in this end. My favorite way of weaving ends in stockinette stitch on a sock is to just go through my yarn with this darning needle. Is quite sharp, which I love, so I can kind of split the yarn in diagonal. So this is where my yarn is coming out of, so I'll just kind of split a few different stitches. Doesn't have to be super precise, because when you split the yarn, it's not gonna show in the front at all. So I go into, 5, 6-ish stitches. I pull, and then I come back in the same diagonal in the opposite direction, like so. Always splitting that yarn. Oops. Like you can tell, it's not a very precise science, and I've never had any ends come unwoven. So here, now it's tightly stuck in there. I'm gonna cut it not too short here, and you can't tell it's there in the front at all. It's right. I don't even know where it is actually. I think it might be here. And now one last, which is the first one here. For ribbing, I'll go inside the sock always. I'll find the nearest column of knit stitches, and I'll just kind of spiral my needle through a column like so. All the way down-ish, and then pull it through. Pull on it, because right now I just really pulled too hard, so I'm just gonna make sure that it's nice and not pulling on the knitting. Cut. And you're done. The only thing you have to do now is wash and let your sock dry. If you want it to look very pretty, you can make sure that when you're letting it dry, you flatten it and you pull it or push it in the shape that you want. You can also use a sock blocker, but this is really just if you have one. Don't go out of your way to buy a sock blocker if you don't have one. This is super wash wool, so I will toss it in the wash with my regular clothes when it's time to wash it, and then I'll just lay it flat to dry. But in the first time, because I'm anxious to wear my pair of socks, I might just let it soak with some mild soap and just give it a little smush around, rinse it, and lay it flat to dry like every other knitting that I own. But then after that, once it's been worn, into the washer it goes. That's it. You have to then make a second sock exactly the same way, and hopefully you get a beautiful pair of socks that fit you very well.
Here you go, your sock is finished. Congratulations. Hopefully you had a fun time knitting it with me. If you have questions, don't hesitate to put them down. I love reading you. If you need something to do while your socks are drying, go download June's Journey in the link down below. And if you liked this video, maybe you would like to try your hands at knitting a sweater that I have right here. Happy knitting!